how do we deal with anger? That's a big question today. I hear a lot, especially in spiritual circles, especially in Buddhist circles, about nonviolence. And that's wonderful, and I'm a big fan of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, the Dalai Lama. I even lived at Gandhi ashrams in India in the 70s and studied his works. He's a big inspiration to me. But more than nonviolence, let's make the next step towards helpfulness, actually doing something positive, not just refraining from harming, but actually altruism and helpfulness and benevolence. We could make that next step. But anger is a big problem today in our volatile times, because anger leads to hatred, rage, and violence. Anger is not the same as violence, and we don't need to suppress our anger, nor do we need to indulge it and dump it on others. Buddha said, if there are no seeds of anger in my heart and mind, who can make me angry? And that if you throw sparks onto a peaceful heart, it's like a peaceful, placid lake where the sparks just go and hiss and die. You know, the embers become darker and sink. But if you throw it onto a seething, a heart full of hatred and jealousy and fear and anxiety and insecurity, it's like a lake of kerosene or oil, and the sparks make it explode. So it seems like the other is making us angry, but it's really, no one can make me angry. I have to take responsibility for anger myself, because it's not what happens to me, but what I make of it that makes all the difference. That's the principle here, again, of self-mastery and inner autonomy, spiritual freedom, the inherent freedom of being. Nobody can make me angry. Nobody can make me feel inferior unless I accept that and do it to myself, and so forth. So how we deal with the anger within. We'll talk about harm later, how we deal with others' anger. But spiritual work is mainly work on ourselves at first, although we're interconnected and there's a reciprocity here, of course. But the true battlefield is the heart of man, as Dostoevsky said. Not wars. Wars are not fought over borders. You know, it's not weapons that kill people. It's people that kill people, and so forth. So why is this occurring? It's occurring from the greed and meanness and cupidity and fear and insecurity and intolerance of people. And we see that all throughout history and all around the world today. So we live in a violent era, a volatile world. We all see violence, and there's hot wars, I mean shooting wars in 42 countries in the world today, I read. But also we have domestic violence in our homes and in families, and children being beaten, and all kinds of violence being acted out. Also aggression, basic aggression that we act out almost every moment, which is aggressively trying to change things from as they are. That we're always fighting with reality as it is. This is the base, what Buddhists call basic aggression, insisting or wanting things to be different than they are. So have we even considered that as a form of anger and aggression? I'm not sure. We don't need to suppress anger. Anger is just an energy, an emotion, what we call in Buddhism a klesha, an obscuring emotion, or an affliction, an obscuration. Anger also has its positive parts. It's wisdom, it's discriminating discernment, which sees what's wrong. Like if we see somebody being mugged in the street, we get angry, the adrenaline surges, and we rush to help and we shout. So it has its wisdom, its logic, its emotional intelligence, as they started to call it recently in social sciences. So we shouldn't suppress anger. We don't have to suppress any of the emotions or kleshas, but realize what they are and what their proper function is. So anger is just an energy. It's an arising energy. It's an obscuring emotion. It's a feeling. It's an energy. If we could feel it in our body when it's arising, in the moment of arising, and this is where mindful awareness practice comes in. If we can cultivate mindful awareness and lucid presence of mind, the main Buddhist meditation practice, not just crossing our legs and closing our eyes and going inward, but in every moment, if we're stuck in traffic and we're irritated, if we're waiting for an elevator, if somebody says something we don't like at the office or at home or whatever, when we feel that energy rise, if we take a breath and tune into where we feel it, we turn our attention away from them, the object, to the subject, and to deal with it ourselves, so we can have a sacred pause, create some space of mindfulness between stimulus and response, create a sacred pause for some space of mindfulness. As my grandmother used to say, count to 10, Jeffrey, before you hit back. You know, she was telling me this in 3rd grade. Now my Buddhist teachers say, Thich Nhat Hanh might say, breathe and relax and think about how you're going to respond. So create some space for mindfulness to take place so you can have some spiritual intelligence active before you blindly respond with a knee-jerk reaction. There's no need to retaliate with a habitual knee-jerk reaction. We can think about it, we can feel our way into it, feel it where it is in our body, perhaps the anger in our lower belly, in our breath, or tension, constriction around the heart. Feel it in your body. And turn the attention away from the object of aggression towards the subject so we can choose how and if to respond. So we can respond proactively, so we can respond creatively, constructively, rather than just blindly knee-jerk, reflexive reactivity, usually retaliating in kind. So if somebody harms you, and awareness is much quicker than any physical action, so it doesn't mean you have to necessarily slow down. Of course, if you're a fighter pilot, I'm sure many of you are fighter pilots, or if you're a quarterback in the Super Bowl, I'm sure many of you have that experience. If you're a professional athlete, you have to be trained enough to do these things automatically. But for most of us, we can take a moment to reflect and choose how to respond. If you're a race car driver, maybe not, but if you're an ordinary person trying to hover around the speed limit of life, we have time to choose how to respond. And this is where mindful anger management takes over. Not being a control freak, not suppressing our emotions, anger or any other emotions can be applied to. Mindful emotional management takes over. As we can think about, we can feel, we can intuit, we can reflect upon, cradling the emotion, the anger in this case. Like a baby who's doing something we don't like, but we still love the baby. When the baby's having a tantrum, anger is like a little tantrum. When the baby, like part of our mind's having a little tantrum, when our inner 2 or 4-year-old is reacting to something somebody said, having a little tantrum, we can cradle that baby. We don't just have to have our 20 or 30 or 40-year-old adult self, you know, punch them, shout at them, scream at them, as our little 4-year-old tantrum child would do. So we can cradle the little baby inside, feel the anger, and love it enough to give it some space to just cry a little. Tears are fine. Violence is unnecessary. Anger and violence are not the same. Anger has not yet devolved, degenerated into violence at this point. Anger is just an emotion, an arising energy. It has not yet become hatred. It has not yet become rage, which is the result of too much stuffed down anger that erupts like a volcano once in a while. It's better to let off a little steam through the steam release valve of anger every day, every moment, just hiss out a little steam as appropriate, rather than have a big eruption that covers the whole city once a year, once a decade, covers your whole family, your whole house or office.